Which comes first, the podcast or the business? For Kevin Palmieri, Next Level University has always been about the podcast. The conversations, the value that he and his host, Alan Lazaros, can bring to their audience. But after a rough patch in his life, he's channeled that passion into growing his podcast into a $1 million business. He's been publishing episodes for over 7 years with nearly 2,000 episodes under his belt. And in this episode, we cover how Kevin turned his podcast into a $1 million business, how to use your data to grow your podcast, tactics that you can use to build your confidence as a podcaster, strategies for winning back your time, leveling up your audio and video, how to get started with monetizing your show, and so much more. This conversation is packed with inspiration and insight from a podcaster who's stuck with it. He and his audience have benefited from the journey, and I'm confident that you will too. Hi Kevin, thanks for joining me on Podcasting Amplified. How are you doing today?
I am living the dream, Joe. I appreciate you having me. I am excited to talk podcasting and all things podcasting and see where we end up in our conversation.
Awesome. Thanks again. So Kevin Palmieri and his co-host Alan Lazaros, they host Next Level University, where they provide personal growth tools and strategies to help people achieve the best version of themselves so they can fulfill their dream life. So how did you get started with this? Because it's been, 7 odd years ago since you launched, which is pretty impressive. It's still going. You've got nearly 2,000 episodes out. How did you get started, and why was podcasting right for you in your business?
So my business partner, Alan, had a YouTube channel in 2017. And he said, hey, I want you to come on my YouTube channel and I want to interview you on fitness and mindset and discipline. And I remember saying, Joe, I don't really have any value to add. I don't think. I'm excited to try and see what happens. Let's give it a shot. And it was like an hour and a half interview. And at the end of that interview, I said to one of my other friends that was there, I said, imagine if you could do that for a living. How amazing would it be if you could just sit in front of a camera and a microphone and have cool conversations with cool people? And he said, well, there's people out there that do it. So a few weeks later, I researched what it would be like to start a podcast because I listened to podcasts at the time. And then not much time after that, I had my first mic, which I literally have over here if you're watching on video. I had figured out where to get a logo made. I figured out intro music, outro music, and all that stuff. So yeah, it was really based on the fact that I really enjoyed talking about stuff that I was passionate about. I've always wanted to help people. I just never had a vehicle. I think my purpose is to help. I really think that's my purpose in this world. I just never had the vehicle. So when I came across podcasting, I fell in love with it, and that was the very beginning. It was just cool conversations with cool people, and then obviously it evolves into a business and a niche and all that stuff down the line.
Yeah, great. So the podcast evolved into a business. People can do it different ways. A lot of the podcasters I speak to, they've got their business up and running, and then they think, you know what, maybe a podcast will work. So how do you think this would have gone without the podcast? Do you think there wouldn't be a business if you hadn't have sort of gotten into this speaking and an interview and hadn't really considered starting it to begin with?
Yeah, the business would be non-existent. The way we've always labeled it is we are a podcast first. The podcast is the number one thing we will never miss. We will never miss an episode again. We will do 7 episodes a week until the day we die, as long as that's how long we want to do it for. Because the podcast is the one thing that is the wheel that makes everything else run. So we had, we probably had 200 or 300 episodes before we ever made $1 from the podcast. And then from there it was, is what we're doing a potential business that we could scale? What does that look like? So yeah, the business would not exist the way it does without the podcast because we're very big on adding value. We don't do sponsorships. We don't do ads. We don't do affiliates. I want the podcast to be completely free with nobody selling you anything. We talk about our products and our services, but for me, it's always been, I want it to be free. I want it to be as valuable as humanly possible. And if you decide you want to work with us in some way, shape, or form, there are paid options, but I'm happy with the majority of people just listening for free and growing that way.
Yeah, it's a great mindset to have. And just to give people clarity, you sell courses software, you do speaking gigs, you do coaching. And so who are you helping? Like, is there a particular ideal listener, an ideal client that you focus your content on?
Yeah, it would probably be a very heart-driven human being who is struggling with self-worth and self-belief, who needs to do some of that internal work to get to the next level of their life. We've attracted a female audience primarily, which was a surprise to me. That's nothing, we didn't expect that in the beginning. I'm super grateful, and I hold that responsibility very close to my heart. I'm grateful, and we've learned a lot. But yeah, that's kind of been the majority. And then, as you know, as the podcast grows and then the business grows, you get different opportunities that you never would have gotten. So people started to pay me to coach them on podcasting. It was like, oh, this is cool. Like, what does that look like? So as the podcast grew, we got other opportunities to grow the business in other ways. And that's what I always tell podcasters. I always tell podcasters, if you're focused on growing and monetizing and turning it into a business, get creative, because there are a lot of ways outside the normal ads, sponsorships, affiliates, whatever it is, where you can monetize and grow it into a personal business.
Yeah. And you mentioned about attracting the female audience. Was that just through your sort of analytics you discovered that? And have you made any adjustments based on that? Did you kind of lean into that market, or did you just sort of keep things as they were?
In the very beginning, so in 2017, things were drastically different than they are today. I think people were sharing more on social media, and you'd see it come through your stories every day. So in the very beginning, Joe, I would literally message someone who shared our content. I would send them my cell phone number, and I would say, let's hop on a FaceTime call. I just want to get to know you. I didn't have a product. I didn't have a service. I didn't have anything to sell. I wasn't focused on making money. And we saw a pattern of a lot of the people I talked to in the beginning were young women who wanted to work on their confidence and their self-worth. A lot of them were in relationships that weren't super fulfilling for them. And many of them felt like they were the outsiders on their group because they were focused on self-improvement and nobody else really was in their circles. So from there, we really leaned into it. We leaned into, we're heart-driven but no BS. When we started group coaching, I would say 75% of the people that have gone through group coaching are women. Our team is 80% women. So no, we just kept going. We kept going with that and said, look, right now, this is the audience that we're attracting. Let's keep doing what we're doing. Let's keep leaning into authenticity and who we are. And I think it's one of the reasons is there's a lot of people out there that say, grind your face off, work all day, every day, or you won't be successful. I think there's another side of humans that say, just only do what you feel like doing, and if it's meant to be, it'll be. Our truth is somewhere in the middle, and I think people like the fact that we're very honest about the way I live my life is probably not what's best for you, just based on what I do. But there might be an opportunity to learn from what I do, just like there might be an opportunity for me to learn from what you do. And I think that's kind of a unique thing that we have that people have really enjoyed.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that, because I feel like some podcasters then not necessarily, I mean, you know, it takes a while to get the data to work this out, but also just listening to what people are saying, like who is actually listening to your podcast and getting value out of it, not just, you know, who you think is listening or who you hope is listening, but who is actually listening and how can you then tailor it to them. And it's probably helped with your growth, I can imagine.
Yeah, definitely. And we're very big on data. So I have all of our episodes in a spreadsheet. I'll figure out, okay, this episode did really well compared to this one and this one. Was it the title? What are the buzzwords? So a simple little thing I always give to clients is write down the top 25 to 50 problems you think your audience deals with. You might not know yet. You might not be sure of that yet. And then write down the top 25 to 50 buzzwords that you think your audience resonates with. Start doing episodes on that, and then start using those buzzwords in your titles, and then go through the data and say, well, every time we do an episode on vulnerability, it gets 10% more listens than the other episodes. Interesting. When we put the word discipline in there, it doesn't do as well. okay, what do we want to do with that data? So that's been a very helpful thing for us is we're very big in, let's look at the data. What does the data say? And then let's see if we can replicate that result using the data.
Yeah, and I guess you have a lot of data because did you say 7? Has it always been sort of 5 to 7 episodes a week?
No, in the beginning we started with 1, and then we went up to 2, and then I ended up leaving my job and trying to do this full time. So then it was 3, and then it was 4, and then we just kept going until we hit 6, and then we said, look, we're already doing 6. We might as well just do 7. So that was. It probably took us. I'm pretty sure we've been doing an episode a day every day now for like 3 years. So it took us 4 years, realistically, 3.5, 4 years to get up to 7 episodes a week.
Wow. And you mentioned that it was sort of 200-300 episodes before you started making money. I find that some people, they don't realize quite how much work it is when they get started. And they also don't realize quite how long it can take to gain traction. And even back then, I mean, this was sort of 7 odd years ago, and podcasting is even more sort of busy these days, the landscape. How did you sort of keep going after hundreds of episodes? I mean, obviously the point was eventually to make money, I'm guessing. So how did you keep going until then, like just grinding away for how long you did before you started turning into this into business?
Yeah, I went into debt as much as they'll let you go into debt. That was step 1. I just kept going and going and going into debt. I do not suggest that for any human being listening. A couple beliefs. One, I had a very firm belief that if I could do this for the rest of my life, I would be the most fulfilled person in the world. I really had that belief that I've worked a lot of terrible jobs. I've done a lot of stuff that I didn't want to do. I've punched time clocks since I was 16. I don't want to do that anymore. So I had a very deep belief that if I can figure this out, if we can figure this out, and I can do this for a living, my life would be amazing. That was one belief. The other belief is I was suicidal before I left my job. So I was all the way at rock bottom, and then I kept digging and found out that rock bottom had a basement. For me, it was onwards and upwards. I didn't feel like there was really anywhere else for me to go. That was part 2. And the last thing is, I think a lot of us, I am very guilty of this. This is a big piece of my story. We have our P's in the wrong order. We find something that's super profitable, and then we try to convince ourselves that we're passionate about it.
Yeah.
I found something that I was unreasonably passionate about. And I said, if only I could find a way to stay in the pool and keep swimming. So that was really it for me. I just loved it so much that I thought if I could stay doing this forever, it would be amazing. And I feel like this is my purpose. I feel like helping people and impacting people is my purpose. So if I can figure this out, it'll be the best. That really is what got me through. And I had a business partner. And I think oftentimes that goes under the radar, where it wasn't just me suffering by myself. I had someone who was struggling through it with me, and we were masterminding behind the scenes, and we were getting better together and learning lessons. So I also had a deep belief that I would grow a ton throughout this process. And I always say this, selfishly, I have learned more from the podcast than any listener, because I've done all the episodes, and before the episode and after the episode, I get to talk about the stuff we just talked about. So the podcast has been the best growing experience for me as well. And that's something I didn't understand as much in the beginning.
Yeah. So I guess really you need that passion for the podcast. It has to be for you equally than it is to your audience, and finding, yeah, if you could put a podcast together that isn't just like, right, we better make this podcast because it seems like that might help our business. But even if you weren't making money with it, you'd still carry it on. Then
100%.
Yeah, that's what
Yeah,
could give
100%.
you that drive to continue.
I have a firm belief that it is about the audience. I think that's always kind of been my thing, is there's a lot of days, transparently, there's a lot of days I don't want to do it. We're recording 3 episodes today. So today from 10 a.m. until 6 p.m., I'm booked back to back to back to back with calls or consultations or whatever it is, podcasts. And I don't want to record 3 episodes today, but it's become, and it is my responsibility. I signed up for this. I signed up to do an episode every day for as long as humanly possible. And I want to do it for the community. I want to do it for the audience. I want to do it because if we're going to talk about us getting a little bit better every day and the audience getting a little bit better every day, the least I can do is show up every day to help. So that's always been a through line for me. And I understand not everybody wants to do it for this reason, but I don't really expect my life to get easier. The podcast isn't so I can scale more and work less. That's just not why we're doing it. But I know a lot of people might want to move in that direction. So I'm probably not the poster child for that necessarily.
Yeah. And then what you said about having a partner, I'm sure that's very helpful for people as well. Like I was speaking to the pair who do the SEO Mindset podcast this morning, and they do a co-hosted podcast like yourself. And yeah, they've said it makes it so much easier having that accountability. And then, like you say, for your business as well. Yeah. Or if you don't have someone, if you don't have a co-host or a business partner, then maybe you can get that from hiring a coach or, having someone on your side doing some part of the podcast, even if it's not hosting with you. And
groups, Facebook groups, you could get in there and get some accountability or networking, whatever it is. But yeah, it's hard. It's hard to keep going. So I have another podcast that's about podcasting that has 103 episodes. And when I was starting that, it was so humbling to be by myself for the first time in like 6 years, 5 years. It was weird, Joe, for me to sit down and say, all right, I'm going to do a solo episode just by myself. That was really, really, really weird for me. But then very similarly to the way we do the other podcast, it's on my calendar every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Yeah. You can't book over it. It's always there. So that way it always remains a priority and that'll never get missed.
And for the audience, what's the name of that second podcast for podcasters?
That one is Podcast Growth University. That's the second one.
Cool. So it's all part of that brand then.
Yep.
So if there was one thing that you feel that would have made this whole process a lot easier when you started, one thing that you wish you'd known, what would you say that would be?
You're probably going to have to go out and find more listeners that are just going to find you. I didn't really understand the supply and the demand of content. I thought, well, I'm going to make a podcast. It'll be cool. And then people will flock to it. But just because you create the supply does not mean you're creating demand. Sometimes you have to go out and build the demand. I think a lot of us fall into the trap of seeing a celebrity start a podcast or somebody with some sort of notable reputation, and then that podcast being on the top charts immediately. That's because there was demand. And then they just created supply. For most of us, it's probably not going to end up that way. So I wish I understood that. I didn't really understand how much of a long game this was in the very beginning. I didn't understand that most podcasts don't really see great results or any results until a couple of years in. I didn't understand that. I thought, yeah, we'll give it a couple months, we'll grow and everything will be fine. I didn't understand how much of a long game this was. That was a really, really big piece of it. And I think the second thing, if I was to add a second one, is a lot of people get stuck in this place where they don't grow because they don't delegate, and they don't delegate because they haven't grown enough. And it's this weird place where people get stuck, where they're spending their time, energy, effort, and focus doing stuff that they could pay someone else to do, and then they could use that time, energy, effort, and focus to make money through the podcast. So that's something that I wish I knew sooner, that yes, delegation costs money, but if you have a business model and you have a business acumen, you can probably use that time to make more money, and that's the ultimate goal.
So on those 2 points, let's say a podcaster, they've been podcasting for 6 months, a year or whatever, and they do want to outsource some of the process, but it's not making money because I've had this conversation podcast as well. They say, well, the podcast isn't making any money, so I can't spend money on it. What would you say to those people, and how would you suggest them getting started, even if it was just a way of easing themselves into outsourcing some of the process?
I would say some of you are absolutely correct. You're not making money, and maybe it's not time for you to delegate yet. If you have a full-time job that is creating enough income where you can put some money into the podcast, I would think of it as an investment. If we were to talk about opening a coffee shop, you have to pay for the water, you have to pay for the rent, you have to pay for the electricity, you have to pay for all of that long before you ever make a dollar. So that's kind of how it works in business. Sometimes in business, you have to put money out before you make money back in. So that's what I would say. But not everybody's at that place. So it depends on how serious you are about this. Are you very, very serious about turning this into a business? That conversation is going to happen a little bit faster for you than someone else. Do you love doing all of the post-production stuff and you don't want to delegate that? That's a completely different conversation if that's something that fills your cup. So those are a few conversations worth having if you're there. But if you feel like you can't make money because you don't have enough time, but you do have a little bit of extra money that you could invest in the podcast, it might be time to do something about it. And honestly, I think most people would just benefit from going to Fiverr or Upwork and finding somebody who does something that you need help with and at least testing it out. Worst case, you don't get a great result and that investment doesn't really create a return on it. But at least then you understand what it's like to delegate and what it's like when you put it in somebody else's hands and the quality that you get back and how to lead effectively. So I would just go on Upwork. I would go on Fiverr. If you're in a podcast Facebook group, there's a million people that are waiting to help you. You can get it done pretty cheap depending on where you go. I think you could probably get audio editing for $100 a month if you did it right, and that's something you don't want to do. Just be very careful and do research to make sure the person's vetted. But it almost doesn't matter in the beginning. It almost doesn't matter what happens when you delegate. You just need to prove to yourself that you can.
Yeah, just give it a go. And like you say, things that fill your cup. I guess if you're not sure what to delegate, then think about the thing that drains you the most about the whole process and see if you can start there.
Yeah. And
for those who are just starting or haven't started yet, but based on our listeners, they've probably just started. They're a few dozen episodes in, and they're struggling with putting themselves out there. So maybe they're struggling with approaching people to come on their show because their listener base isn't large enough, or they don't want to do video because they think that no one wants to see their face, and that's something I've heard people say before. What would you say to them about helping them with their confidence? Helping them sort of put themselves out there more and not worrying so much about that side of things.
Yeah, that is a challenge because it depends on where you are in terms of your confidence. My thing has always been just do the next thing that scares you a little bit more than the current thing scares you. So, okay, let's say you're convinced that you don't want to do video and you don't want to be on YouTube because nobody wants to see your face. And it's deeper than that. Maybe you don't like the way you look on camera, or I've had clients in the past who say, I cannot watch myself on video. It's like, we're going to have to work through that. That's something that we're going to have to work through if you really want the results that you aspire to get. I would start doing content on social media, start doing video content on social media, or start recording video when you do your audio and don't put it up, but just get comfortable with the process of recording the video and then maybe watching it after and seeing how it feels and seeing how it looks. I know a lot of people who have done a ton of private content to build confidence long before they ever did any public content. So that's what I would suggest, particularly for the YouTube thing. I think YouTube is a huge opportunity. And trust me, in the beginning, I was super self-conscious about video. I didn't want to be on video all the time. Now I don't even think about it. So it's just the exposure therapy of doing it over and over and over and over and over again, just like anything else. When it comes to reaching out, putting yourself out there for guests and that type of stuff, there's a million platforms to do it now. So you're probably not going to get rejected nearly as much as you used to. We used to just cold DM people on Instagram and we would get rejected all the time and it was terrible and I didn't like it very much. But now there's a lot of systems in place where there's Podmatch and Matchmaker and podcastguests.com and all these different platforms where people are literally there because they want to be on podcasts. I would probably make that 80% of the reach out you do to build confidence. And then maybe 20% of the reach out you do is what we call A-level guests, people you reach out to and you kind of expect to get rejected. But I think it's that understanding in the beginning that we really need to get honest with ourselves that some people aren't going to come on your show. It doesn't mean you're terrible. It doesn't mean you can't be successful. It just means that where you currently are and where they currently are aren't necessarily aligned. I always use the Grammy analogy. If I'm a brand new artist, the odds of me getting on a Grammy track with a Grammy artist are pretty low because nobody really knows me yet. But if I'm a Grammy level artist, I can get almost anybody I want on. Podcasting's very similar. So it's okay in the beginning if you can't get big guests on. It's almost to be expected. But what you can do is build your confidence and build some momentum up with some easier to get guests that actually want to come on podcasts. Get that system down, get that confidence down, and then you can take a little bit more of a shot next time. That's the advice I would give. I think it's now the barrier to entry for guests is lower. So I think the rejection rate is probably also lower. And you don't have to have as much confidence to get going as you did in the beginning.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Yeah. And
of course,
you might find that some of those guests that were more than happy to come on your show might even be more suited to your audience. Whereas if you're sort of focusing too much on those big guests, maybe you're thinking more about the clout and what they can do for your podcast rather than what they can do for your audience.
Yeah.
You mentioned YouTube, and so do you put all your episodes on YouTube as well as?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, if you're watching on YouTube at the moment, Kevin has a really nice setup, and your audio as well sounds fantastic. So,
thank you.
I thought we could just touch on that for a little bit because I know that's something a lot of podcasters struggle with. Is this something that you've built up over time? I'm presuming you didn't, right from the start, buy all the equipment and try and make it perfect right from the beginning. And what do you think has been the most important thing to you? I mean, you obviously understand the importance of good audio and video, but where did your journey start with that, and how's it gone over the last few years?
One of the reasons I love having the old content up, Joe, is people can go back and see how bad the setup was in the beginning. It was terrible. It was very bad. I started in my living room.
Yeah.
Then we at one point moved into my dining room. And then sometimes I do it in my sketchy office. And then eventually Alan's mom had a spare room at her house. And that's where we set up our first quote unquote studio. But it was not good. It was just a black backdrop. We had a skeleton named Steve McQueen, who was like our mascot. And he had a tank top on. And we had a TV behind us. And it was not good. And then we upgraded that a little bit and got a different TV and different lights and a different camera. And then we moved down to the basement. And then right when COVID started, we actually got our first custom studio that we built. And then we moved into, everybody's going virtual, so we might as well just build studios at home. But this is the simplest thing. I am obsessed with improving. So even right now, if you're watching this on video, this little space here between the pictures of my wife and I and the corner of the camera is annoying me. And I don't know why it's there. My camera must have moved, and that's upsetting to me. So I'm gonna fix that after this. I've always tried to get the best audio quality and the best video quality with what was realistic for me. We couldn't afford nice cameras in the beginning, so we used our iPhones. And then we would edit it after, and it was a pain in the butt, but that's all we could do in the beginning. It's been a conversation of consistent improvement over time. And if you go back and watch some of the old episodes and listen to the old audio, it was not nearly as good as it is today. One habit that I think all podcasters would benefit from, speakers, podcasters, musicians, is listening to your own stuff. So when you do an episode and it drops, let's say it drops Friday at noon, you should be the first one to listen to that episode. You should be the first one to watch it, because you're going to get the opportunity to say, oh, these are some really important wins from this episode. These are some really important improvements. And even a couple weeks ago, we just tried something new to improve the audio quality. We're always trying to improve as we go, because that's one of the things that you can actually influence. So I would say start where you can actually start. Don't freak out if you don't have a great camera. Don't freak out if you don't have a great backdrop. It's okay. Everybody starts somewhere, and where you start might just be different than somewhere else. But just focus a little bit on improvement over time, and you're going to get better naturally because of that.
Yeah. And it's great that you've still got the old content up. You know, it's not like you're hiding behind the new content or anything, like trying to put on this facade that you always had this set up. So if you're not on YouTube at the moment, after this, have a look on YouTube, Next Level University. Have a look at Kevin's old stuff and Kevin's new setup, and it'll give you some inspiration, I think. And
I appreciate it.
Just to show that you don't have to be perfect right from the beginning. It's cool. So in terms of monetization, then you've put this business together based on the podcast itself. How did you get started when it came to monetizing the podcast? Did you always have an idea of where you wanted to go with it as a business, or did you sort of react to what people need? Because there's all sorts of facets to your business, as we mentioned, and I'm guessing it wasn't all there at the beginning. So how did you get started with this?
I ran out of money. I ran out of money, and I remember I had a conversation with my business partner. I said, dude, I got to start making money or I'm going to die. The momentum that we're building is going to die because I can't afford to continue. And he said, well, what you should start doing is coaching for free. And I said, no, I don't think you understand what I'm saying. I need money. I need to find a way to make some money here. Free is not going to cut it. And he said, well, you've never coached in this way. We got to build trust with the audience. You got to add value. You should coach for free and see what happens. So in the very beginning, I reached out, and this is why being a part of the community is so important. I reached out to 5 people that I knew listened to the show. I said, hey, I'm interested in doing coaching. I've never really done it in this way before. I'm going to do kind of a beta test of coaching. What do you think of 2 months of coaching completely free? $0. I'm not going to, there's no strings attached. You don't have to work with me after. If you enjoy it, awesome. I just want to get some reps under my belt. And everybody said yes. Everybody said, yeah, that sounds awesome. So I coached everybody for free for whatever it was, 2 months. And at the end, I said, I can't do this for free anymore just because it's really hard to maintain all this. What do you think of $50 per call? And then everybody said yes. So to me, that was the first proof of concept that coaching might actually be a potential revenue stream for the business. And then the $50 went to $75, and $75 went to $100 as demand built. Not just because I wanted to make more money. It was, well, when I have 10 people who are willing to pay me $50, the next person I'll say is $75. And then when I get 10 people to pay me $75, the next person will be $100. And then kind of rinse and repeat that. So that was our monetization model for the first year of monetizing, right? So 2 or 3 years in. And then from there, a lot of it became, well, what are the most common questions we get asked? Well, people would say, how do you guys do this with the podcast? So then we opened a branch that is like a podcast production company and coaching and courses and all that. Cool. Then somebody asked us about website stuff. Well, you guys are doing my podcast. Do you know anybody who can do my website? And I was like, yeah, we have somebody on the team. So then we had a web service department. And then we built a social media department. And we actually just built a new department recently for video interviewing and breaking it up into content. So in the very beginning, it was do whatever you can to pay the bills that's aligned within the business model. And then as we grew, much like you referenced, we listened to what people were asking for. And we said, one, is this a problem we can solve? Two, is this a problem that we want to put time into solving? And three, does it ultimately fit into our business model? We've had a lot of fringe opportunities that we've said no to just because it doesn't fit into our business model. And our business model is set up for a very, very, very long road, not just short-term profitability and then burnout. So yeah, when I say get creative with monetization, that's what I mean. I mean, it might not be just the one thing you think it's going to be. You never really know the opportunities that might present themselves when you lengthen the road by making money in the first place.
Yeah. So just getting started, like I know some people would never give away anything for free, especially if they're doing content as well. But if it's something that you've never done before professionally, and yeah, if it works, and I'm not surprised people sort of jumped on the chance as well, because when you're listening to someone on a podcast and they're helping you week in, week out, then getting some personalized support from that person is almost a dream come true for some people. But yeah, for the listener, if you go onto nextleveluniverse.com and you see there's all these products like this doesn't just happen. Like it's easy to see
no.
podcasters with these big businesses and think, no, I'll never get to that point. But you've just pointed out how it kind of trickles in, and you just build things based on the demand, and it eventually gets to where it is now.
Well, and the other thing too that I think it's super important to state that, I don't know, maybe other people would leave out or forget to say, a lot of what gets done is behind the scenes, and it's somebody that you will never meet or see. We have a 22-person team. So I'm not working on the website. There's somebody who is way better at that's working on the website. And when we have a department meeting, we say, all right, these are the thoughts that we have. What do you think? All right, cool. Let's implement that. So the other thing that's been super powerful for us is as we've grown as a business, we're very quick to bring new people on the team, because that creates more opportunity to make more money and then grow the business more and then impact more people. We give away a lot of stuff, but the only reason we can give away as much as we do is because we're actually a profitable business.
Yeah.
So it'll always be free. There'll never be any paywall to listen to the podcast. That will never happen. It's just not in the business model. We'll always have at least one free course. We do a free monthly meetup every single month. We have a Facebook group that's always going to be free, and there's value in it every day. There's always going to be some level of free to our business, because to your point, Joe, you may never want to spend money in the business, and that's okay. There'll still be a place for you. And I think that's an important thing. But yeah, it's not us. It's not just us. One of the reasons we're able to grow and do so many different things is because we have a really big team behind the scenes that a lot of people don't see, and they're often considered the unsung heroes because they're not on the mic every day like I am.
Yeah, I think there's always going to be people who want to spend money on something and people who don't want to spend money on something, and you've got options for both of those. I saw a comment recently on LinkedIn referring to Stephen Bartlett, who does Diary of a CEO podcast, and he was selling a course, and I saw someone commenting saying, like, you're making hundreds of millions with your business. You shouldn't be selling anything. You should be giving all this away for free. But he gives so much away for free as it is, and then there are people who they want to invest some money in. They'll pay attention more. They'll if they feel it's worthwhile and there's a return on investment, then there's always going to be both of those kinds of people, both of those markets.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Not everything is meant for everyone. That's the hardest realization. Not everybody's ever going to give you money, and some people want to give you money. It just depends on what percentage it is.
Yeah. And then just finishing up, what would you say is the most challenging part of this this podcasting journey that you've faced, and how did you get through it?
Man, I would say probably juggling the podcast and the business and everything else. It's really hard. I work 12 hours a day, pretty much 6 days a week. So I'm working a lot of hours. It doesn't leave a ton of time for other stuff. So it's been a very important practice for me to prioritize my health and my fitness and my sleep, and prioritize time with my wife and my family, because the podcast will take all my time if I let it.
Yeah.
It will take all of my time. It will take every hour of every day, because it's a growing business. So I understand that might not be relatable to everyone. That's been my biggest struggle. But in the beginning, my biggest struggle was believing that I was actually the type of person that could do this, and then working through the imposter syndrome of, one, who is ever going to listen to me? What do I know about self-improvement? Two, can I actually add value to someone if they're giving me money? That was always something that was really hard. I felt really good coaching all these people for free, but the second they started paying me, I got really nervous, even though it was the same exact thing in the same exact way. So working through that imposter syndrome, I would say a more relatable problem was that, because I still get opportunities today that I don't always feel ready for. And I have that imposter syndrome. I still deal with that on a pretty common basis. And I don't want you to think, if you're watching or listening, whether you're watching or listening, that just because I am maybe where you want to get to, if this is what you aspire to, awesome. If not, no worries. Maybe you aspire to way more, awesome. But I just don't want you to think, oh, Kev is there, Kev has it all figured out, and Kev isn't dealing with any of those problems anymore. It is not the truth. We still have problems as a business. I still work on my own internal stuff as a human being. And honestly, a lot of that has gotten harder with more success. And I think it's important to be transparent with that.
Love it. Thank you. Thank you for this.
Of course, you're welcome.
Tons of insight for podcasters wherever they are in their journey, I think. So you can find Next Level University on any podcast platform, including YouTube, I'm presuming. And the nextleveluniverse.com website. You're on LinkedIn, Instagram. We'll get those links in the show notes. Is there anywhere else you'd like to send people if they want to learn more?
Nope. No. That's it. I appreciate it. I appreciate you, Joe. You can always reach out if you have questions, comments, anything. I'm happy to answer. I'm not the type of person who's going to say, you got to send me money if you want me to answer your email. I'm not that type of person. So any questions you got, please send them over.
Cool. Thanks, Kevin. I appreciate this.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks for listening to Podcasting Amplified. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. We'll be back next time with another conversation offering more insights to take your podcast to the next level and help you to achieve success. Happy podcasting.